I'm interested to know from the studies that you've been doing and the research, how many different work zones or areas you think are appropriate in a relevant sized business. So probably not 500 people, but in a business that, if you like, can afford it and has the space for people to work in. Obviously we're seeing a little bit of a move away from people working at traditional workstations and the words third space and breakout area and stuff. Are there other areas like pods which people can work in to be able to focus? What does an employer or a workspace need to provide to get the best out of their employees?
I'm dead against people crawling into igloos or pods or, just to get some quiet and write something. I would like to see a workplace which is open, which is relaxed, where there are protocols in place. And this is one of the things that I've noticed, is that people have gone into, especially I've looked at the government workplace quite extensively. We also did a study in Australia looking at the Melbourne banking industry. We did it with the University of Melbourne's architecture department. And then, bankers were dragged blinking into kind of open plan spaces. And they had absolutely no clue about the rituals and cultures of open plan space. They'd worked in private rooms for 50 years, and each successive generation of workplace was used to that type of style. And suddenly they were in these spaces with boulevards and plants and open plan space, and they didn't have a clue how to behave. Of course, they constantly interrupted each other. And I think the big problem, and the same in the civil service, big problem is the institution of proper cultures of work and rituals and protocols. It's an issue of protocol. If you say, well, that end of the office is like a public library. You can't use your mobile, you can't shout, and you can't talk. And if people are working at that end of the office, and it can be bright and light, and you can see them or whatever, they're doing private considerative work, and we're not going to disturb them. And if you enforce those rules, then you don't need to build lots of little pods that people have got to climb into. I mean, sometimes it's good to have a meeting, and the different companies around Clerkenwell Design Festival have got, nice kind of meeting pods. It's quite nice, like in a restaurant booth where you really want to have, I like restaurant booth type enclosures and those types of things. We just need to be more imaginative with the products. But I don't think we need, I think we need to accept that A, we need to tell people what to do, and there's a big problem in the British workplace about that. We don't tell anybody to do anything nowadays for fear of, can't tell people to be quiet. And B, we need to accept that most people are doing more private considerative work, and they need the spaces to do it. So it's not a question of proportion. I think it's a question of protocols and culture.
I'm going to go back to the first part of your question, which was about how many different types of spaces do we need in an office, because that's something we've been grappling with. We work a lot in Denmark. We have a few Danish clients, and we found that the Danish are quite amazing in the way that they bring their domestic sensibility in that there's pleasure and comfort in the home. Their workplaces are very similar. They're healthy, and they're healthy because people move around, and they move around freely, and they have free choice. But they don't feel unrooted or unhinged by that. They don't have zones they call chill-out zones. They don't have, this is the only place to have a coffee. They don't have distinct places that are differentiated as they would be on an architectural plan. They have different kinds of situations where you can come together or you can work individually. So in terms of number, and when we are designing our work, we actually decided to make a great kind of condenser so that you don't actually have to leave it to do anything. Now you might say, oh, that's completely unhealthy, we need to walk more, we need to do activity. But the great thing about it is that it's a place that's very flexible, that allows for the kind of choice that I think people are really asking for: individual choice, group choice as well, when you have common goals, etc. And we're really, you have to deal with all kinds of things when you design an office like that, like sound, carrying privacy, levels of privacy. But one of the things we decided early on is that we're not afraid to say this is a workplace. This is a place where work goes on. We have, one of our clients is BlackBerry, and he said early on when we were working with him, he said, you know where I take my private calls? I go to my car. That's my pod. Yeah, that's what he does in Toronto, because there's no place he can go. And the great thing, the great promise of this tool, that it's ubiquitous, it is a great promise, but it also has a cost, which is there's no privacy. But guess what? There is no privacy in the workplace. If you go to Bloomberg or other media companies, they're absolutely transparent. They're absolutely full-time energetic. And I do think that is the way work is going. So for the people who don't want to work that way, they're not going to be in big collaborative environments. They're not going to be wanting to go to the work. They can do more considered work elsewhere. But I think the office itself is, just like cities are just like London is, whatever, they're saying its own country in terms of capital and investment and immigration, etc. That's what's happening to cities, and that is what's happening to offices. So offices that want to really thrive and really grow and really want to go forward are going to have these kinds of high pressure, high energy environments. Where do we go to chill out? It's not going to be in the office.
Well, I don't agree.
I'm sure you don't.
I really don't agree.
Question number 1, Jeremy, where do we sign up to be sponsored by Herman Miller to do the investigative work that we usually struggle to get our clients to pay for? Because I suspect we all have that problem. My ramble, okay, and this is probably focused on Jeremy a bit, user-centered seems really sensible. The Starbucks generation now surely don't need a setting. They've proven it because they sit in a cafe. Generation Y will presumably realise relatively soon that social networking is not working. And because you don't get paid for it, and you're not generating anything for your employer. And for Kim, I'm an architect, and I'm actually horrified to hear that industrial design has no context. Surely its history must be rooted in need. And it's interesting you talked about the Danes. I know them well, and of course their industrial design ethic is incredibly strong. The fact is now we buy solutions to things we never knew we needed. And IT and technology are a great example of that. So the question to you is, what is the application to business and the return on investment of the approaches that you take?
I'm not sure I understand that second point. The application to business, can you say that again?
Well, presumably your clients pay for what you do.
Yeah.
I'm
What's
just
the
wondering.
return on their investment?
Yeah, what is the return on their investment? And how do they measure
this
it?
is the bigger discussion about design, I think, as well. The role of design, the value of design in general. There's not, as you know, if you're an architect, there's not a one-to-one relationship about return on investigating design or research. There is not that. The same with social networking. There is not a one-to-one relationship about return, but certainly there's so many entrepreneurs, there's going to be huge return for some of them because they have done that kind of activity. I think this goes more to what Oliver wanted to ask us about, which is kind of the future of design or the role of design, and if it's actually even a valid practice. I don't believe, I think it's very interesting that we ask people what they want. We're doing that, seems like more and more. It's happening here as well as a kind of exercise. What do you want in your workplace? What do you want out of a cup? If you're able to have a 3D printer on your desktop, what would you make? It's kind of all about that. So what's the role of design in that? I think we're going to reach a crisis point. I'm maybe looking into a crystal ball a bit here. And of course, I would stick up for design as a design education in any of the fields of design, because I think true design education is all about context and connecting things to each other. And I don't think generally people in their use of things think necessarily that way. I think designers can be quite philosophical. I think we are as well. And I think we can help companies be confident in keeping that point of view about the nature of work. For instance, if it's for Herman Miller, what role does design have to do in our history, for instance? We've talked to them about that for years. What is design? You know, good companies ask themselves this continually. We're design advisors for Muji. Muji in Japan asks a select group of designers, what is design? What is Muji? You know, these are questions that are valid. I think when you stop asking yourselves difficult questions, that's when, you know, innovation stops, problem solving stops, strategy stops, everything stops. And you just get this kind of, oh, I thought I wanted a blue cup. I don't care. You know, it's disposable economy kind of thing. You don't get things that are lasting, that are valid, that are relevant now or ever, you know, in 20 years. We try to make things that are relevant not just to buy, not just for the point of purchase, but for the things you want to live around for longer. And that's completely against our consumer culture. It's completely anti. And what I just want to clarify, the one thing about industrial design, the conversation Sam and I had continually when we met is that industrial designers were not, in their history, there are a few exceptions, of course, especially the Italians, connecting the dots. Okay, they were writing about, they weren't in the same way that architecture is continually writing about itself because it never produces anything. You know, so a building doesn't get built, but the project still gets talked about as an influential thing, right? A culturally relevant, influential thing. In industrial design, go back 20 years, but if it didn't get made, we're never going to talk about it because it's not relevant. It's a throwaway kind of thing. So that's what we were talking about. So we're talking about connective tissue.
I mean, I'd answer the question in a slightly different way. In the application to business, I think there's two groups of professionals working on office design currently, and they're kind of poles apart. There's architects who are actually making offices and making the material choices and shaping the physical environments. As you said, don't have the time to do the research, and that's what gets squeezed. And what they do is because of the timescales and the needs, you know, they don't get a really user-centric view of what the office should be. They get a management-centric view. Mm-hmm. So the professionals in the FM community and the managers who are in charge and paying for it, they say, well, we need this and we need that and we need it quick. Then there's another group of people who are doing the post-occupancy studies. There's nothing more stupid and useless than the post-occupancy study. Talk to the users before the process. You know, they've been told to pack up. They've probably been moved. Their commute's been doubled. They've been stuck in a new environment. They've lost their private office, and they've been shoved in open plan. They don't understand the protocols. They don't know who's in control and whether, you know, who you negotiate with to get the lights turned down. And then somebody comes around with a clipboard and says, "What do you think of this place?" You know, and you want to tear their throat out. You know, and then the poor architect, you know, meets with the client who says, "We've had the post-occupancy study, and it's terrible. They don't like your new building." You know, even though it's probably been perfectly well designed. And, you know, there is this terrible gap between, you know, understanding the user and actually shaping the physical environment. We need new approaches. The approach that we're advocating is just one of many. You can slice this cake in lots of different ways. And our argument with companies in all the work, all the research work that we do, is that, you know, you may not like what we have to tell you, but in the long term, if you have a much more happy staff who like coming to work, they'll do more work, they'll be more productive, there'll be less sick leave, there'll be less loss of productivity, people will stay longer, so you won't have recruitment costs, retention will be better, and so on and so forth. So there are business metrics you can put around this stuff, but it's just playing a slightly longer game than the industry currently.